I didn't take my wife seriously at first. That's the honest truth. When Michelle started pointing out the little things, the strange texts, the comments that didn't quite add up, I told her she was overthinking it. I told her Sandra was just one of those people. You know the type. Super involved, always around, means well. I told Michelle to let it go. I wish I had listened to her sooner. My name is Ryan. 3 years ago, my wife Michelle and I moved to Elmwood Court with our 2 kids, our son Tyler who was 9 at the time, and our daughter Grace who had just turned 6. We'd been apartment people our whole lives, and this was our first real house. First real yard. First real neighborhood. We were so excited we couldn't sleep the night before we moved in. Sandra Collins knocked on our door before the moving truck had even finished unloading. She was in her mid-50s, neat gray-streaked hair, wearing a blazer like she'd just come from a meeting. She had a welcome basket, actual gift basket with coffee, snacks, a little American flag pin, and underneath all of that, a printed copy of the HOA guidelines. She shook my hand, then Michelle's, smiled at the kids, and said, "Welcome to Elmwood Court. This is a wonderful community and we take care of each other here." I believed her completely. The first few months were genuinely great. The neighborhood was everything we'd hoped for. Clean streets, friendly faces, kids playing outside after school. Sandra ran a tight ship, monthly HOA meetings, regular newsletters, everything organized and professional. I went to the first 2 meetings, thought they were a little unnecessary honestly, and then stopped going. Michelle kept attending. She liked staying informed. That's how she started noticing things before I did. It started small. We got our first HOA violation notice about 6 weeks after moving in. Our trash bins had been left at the curb 4 hours past the pickup deadline. $40 fine. Michelle called Sandra directly to explain that I'd been out of town for work and she'd simply forgotten. Sandra was warm about it, totally understanding, said she'd waive it this one time as a welcome courtesy. We thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. Over the next few months the notices kept coming. Our welcome mat was not an approved style. The basketball hoop in our driveway needed to be moved 18 inches to the left. One of our window shutters had a small chip in the paint that needed to be addressed within 30 days. Each notice was polite, professionally written, and came with a fine attached. $20 here. $50 there. We paid them. We assumed this was just how HOAs worked and we were still learning the rules. But Michelle started keeping a folder. Every notice, every fine, every letter, she saved them all. And one evening she spread them out on the kitchen table and said, "Ryan, look at this. 11 notices in 4 months." She'd talked to Carol next door, who had lived on Elmwood Court for 6 years. Carol had received 3 notices total in 6 years. Michelle had talked to Mike across the street, 2 notices in 4 years. We had 11 in 4 months. I still told her it was probably just because we were new. Still learning. I still wasn't ready to see what she was already seeing. Then the camera notice came. It was a Tuesday morning. A formal letter, HOA letterhead, informing us that our doorbell camera was improperly angled toward the public sidewalk and needed to be adjusted or removed within 2 weeks or we would face a daily fine of $25. I called Sandra. She was pleasant, professional, explained that neighborhood privacy was important and that cameras needed to meet specific guidelines. I adjusted the camera. I paid the fine for the days before I fixed it. Michelle stood in the doorway watching me do it and said very quietly, "She just made you remove the one thing that could have recorded her." I told her she was being paranoid. 3 weeks later we got a notice for our porch light being too bright. The week after that, a notice because Tyler had left his bike on the front lawn overnight. The fines were piling up and every time I tried to push back, Sandra had the exact bylaw ready, the exact clause, the exact reason. She was never rude. Never aggressive. Always calm, always smiling, always completely in control. And then came the HOA meeting that changed everything. Michelle had been asking me to come for months. That night, something made me go. I almost didn't. I almost stayed home. I will spend the rest of my life grateful that I didn't. Sandra stood at the front of the room with a thick folder and that same patient smile. She said she needed to address some ongoing compliance issues on the street. She opened the folder and started laying photographs on the table. Time-stamped photographs. Of our house. Our driveway. Our front yard. At 11 p.m. At 2 a.m. At 5:30 in the morning. Michelle grabbed my hand under the table. I looked at those photos and felt something cold move through my entire body. Because those angles, those specific angles, were not from any street. They were not from any passing car or walking neighbor. Those photos were taken from cameras that were watching our home. Directly. Deliberately. For a very long time. And Sandra was smiling like she'd done us a favor. Nobody moved. The whole room was frozen. I'm talking about 20 families sitting in that community center, and not a single person made a sound for what felt like a very long time. Just Sandra standing at the front, photographs spread across the table, that calm smile on her face like she just presented a recipe at a bake sale. Mike was the first one to speak. He was sitting 2 rows ahead of us and he turned around slowly and looked at me with this expression I'll never forget. Like he was trying to figure out if what he was seeing was actually real. Then he looked at Sandra and said, "Where exactly did these come from?" Sandra straightened her blazer. "From the neighborhood security system. I had cameras installed on Elmwood Court 2.5 years ago to protect our community. These images were captured as part of routine monitoring." Routine monitoring. I heard Michelle exhale next to me. Slow and sharp, like someone had pressed something heavy against her chest. Because here's what hit me in that exact moment. 2.5 years. That meant those cameras went up just a few months after we moved in. Just around the time the violation notices started. Just around the time Sandra had made me adjust my doorbell camera, the one Michelle said she was removing so nothing could record her. Michelle had been right. About all of it. Every single thing. I raised my hand. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "Sandra, where are these cameras located? I want to know every single location." She told us they were in common areas. Streetlights, the entrance sign, the community mailbox structure. All legal, she said. All within HOA authority. Nothing on private property. But common areas in Elmwood Court aren't out on some distant corner. Our mailbox structure sits 12 feet from our front porch. The streetlight directly in front of our house, the one I'd walked past 1,000 times without thinking twice, was apparently doing a lot more than lighting the street. After the meeting ended, nobody went home. We all just stood in the parking lot in the cold and started talking. Really talking. For the first time since we'd all moved here, we stopped being polite neighbors making small talk and started being honest with each other. And that's when the full picture started coming together. Carol had been getting notices for the past 1.5 years, after 6 years of almost nothing. Mike had received a stack of violations after he'd pushed back against Sandra in a meeting about parking rules. A retired teacher named Frank at the end of the cul-de-sac said he'd received a fine for a crack in his driveway that was literally 2 inches wide, photographed, measured, documented in the violation letter with a precision that now made horrible sense. We pulled out our phones right there in that parking lot and started counting. Between the families standing in that circle, we had over 40 violation notices in the past 2 years. 40. From a street where longtime residents like Carol had barely seen 3 in 6 years. These weren't random enforcement. This was targeted. Systematic. And it was all being driven by footage from cameras that none of us had ever voted for, agreed to, or even known existed. Mike called his cousin that same night. His cousin was a real estate attorney. By the next morning we had a group of 9 families represented and a formal records request filed with the HOA demanding every document related to the camera installation, purchase orders, installation records, board meeting minutes, everything. What came back was worse than we expected. There had been no vote. The HOA bylaws for Elmwood Court required a full homeowner vote with a 2/3 majority before any surveillance equipment could be installed anywhere in the neighborhood. Sandra had never held that vote. Instead she had buried the camera costs inside the annual maintenance budget under a line item labeled, Common Area Infrastructure Improvements. The invoices were real but the categorization was deliberately vague. And she had scheduled the installation during a period where she had restructured several decisions as executive approvals, a power she had quietly granted herself through a bylaw amendment 3 years ago that almost nobody had noticed or attended the meeting for. She had planned this. Carefully. Patiently. Over years. The legal process that followed took several months. Sandra hired her own attorney and her initial defense was exactly what she'd said in that meeting: common areas, street-facing cameras, HOA authority. Technically precise. Carefully constructed. But the missing vote was a hard fact that no amount of careful construction could explain away. The bylaw was clear. The requirement was clear. And the paper trail showing she had deliberately avoided that vote was now in the hands of 9 families and one very motivated real estate attorney. The HOA board held a formal vote on her removal. It passed 7-0. Sandra sat in the front row during that vote with her hands folded in her lap and that same expression she always wore. Patient. Unbothered. Like she was watching something happen to someone else entirely. All 43 violation fines issued during the camera surveillance period were reviewed. 31 of them were dismissed and refunded. The remaining 12 were legitimate violations that had actually occurred: wrong paint color, actual trash schedule issues, real stuff, and those we accepted. That felt fair. That felt like actual accountability, which was something Sandra had never once offered any of us. The cameras came down within a week of her removal. The night they removed the one from the streetlight in front of our house, I stood on the porch and watched the maintenance crew do it. Michelle came outside and stood next to me, and we didn't really say anything for a while. Tyler and Grace were inside doing homework, completely unaware of what the past several months had actually involved. I thought about all the nights I'd pulled into that driveway not knowing. All the mornings Michelle had loaded the kids into the car, Tyler on his bike, Grace in her backpack, just living our normal life while a camera recorded every single moment of it and sent it somewhere we didn't know existed. I thought about how close I came to never going to that meeting. How if I'd stayed home that night, we might still be paying fines and wondering what we were doing wrong. Michelle looked at me at some point and said, "I told you something was off." I know. I know you did. Here's what I want you to take away from this. Sandra wasn't a dramatic villain. She didn't look dangerous. She looked like someone's mom. She brought welcome baskets and remembered your kids' names and ran organized meetings. She was the last person any of us would have suspected, and that was the whole point. That's exactly how it worked for as long as it did. Check your HOA documents. Attend the meetings even when they feel boring. Read the bylaws. Ask where money is being spent. Ask about any infrastructure that gets installed in your neighborhood and demand to see the vote that approved it. Because the biggest threat to your privacy sometimes doesn't come from a stranger. Sometimes it comes from the person with a blazer and a smile who knocked on your door the day you moved in and said welcome to the neighborhood. We live on Elmwood Court still. We like our neighbors. We trust them now in a way that actually means something because we went through something real together. But we keep our own cameras up. Properly voted on. Fully documented. And they face outward.